If your meetings aren't effective and you've already tried all the tricks in the world, then you might be asking the wrong questions. Today's story will explore the puzzle of all puzzles, which is meetings, and it might even help you to avoid meetings in the first place. Stay with me. Welcome back, guys. The sun is shining in this part of the world. However, I have to admit, I got myself into a bit of a pickle. On the 21st of February, I think it was, the sun came out here in southern England and temperatures reached 14 degrees a day later. So I decided I'm packing away my long trousers for the rest of the year, because you need to know, most of the year I wear shorts and sandals. That's just what I like wearing. It feels lighter. Annoyingly, we were back to like 6 to 8 degrees and clouds for the better part of this week. So I found it a little bit chilly in my shorts, to be quite honest. And this wouldn't normally be a problem, obviously, if I hadn't announced my decision so confidently and so conclusively. So here I am pretending I don't really mind and secretly loading on an extra layer over the top so I can compensate for the excess loss of heat around the lower part of my body. And it works somehow, more or less. Anyway, I came across an article this week by TJ Leonard, CEO of Storyblocks, titled "Why Banning All Wednesday Meetings Saved My Employees from Zoom Fatigue and Burnout." It's a fun read, and it intrigued me, so I looked deeper. I looked up the company, and they generate this really likable image of themselves. And I think if I didn't have a job, that'd be one of the first places I would visit if I lived in the States and if I worked in that field, and so on. Anyway, you know by now, even if we've only had 2 episodes so far, that the MarkUp news at least implicitly tend to criticize articles for their content. But that's not the case in this instance. However, the article triggered me to go a bit deeper, because you might feel compelled to take the article's advice to heart and abandon your Wednesday meetings. And that might be a good idea and turbocharge some dormant productivity potential. But it also could lead to frustration. So in all briefness, let me summarize the article very quickly. In the author's company, days were like packed with online meetings, and consequently people's productivity took a toll. So they were looking for a way out, and they came up with this No Meeting Wednesday policy. And I quote, "After piloting No Meeting Wednesday, there was a clear majority who advocated for keeping the policy in place. Team members valued the dedicated time for heads down work, as jumping from meeting to meeting often requires context switching. If you are spending most of your day context switching, it can damage your productivity." Agree with every line of that quote. And further along the article, TJ, the author, explains that they had to make some amendments, as initially the meetings were just basically moved to other days. So the problem kind of got reallocated. So it didn't disappear. It just got moved to different days. And this is kind of where I want to step in and offer an alternative perspective. Because achieving the goal of effective meetings seems to be like finding this holy grail of organizational success, right? And the list of tips is endless. There's hacks out there, there's guidelines out there, and there's even systems out there like Holacracy, for example, where meetings are literally baked into this script-like procedure. And those of you who know me a little bit, they know where I stand with Holacracy, but that's for another episode. Most of the time, though, the prevailing question seems to be, how do we make meetings more effective, right? That's what everyone is trying to respond to. That's the question that's being raised. And that's certainly a good question. It's certainly a question you could and you probably should ask yourself, but it's also quite a limiting question. And it's a bit like asking how to kill time in a traffic jam. Right? You could also ask a much more fundamental question, which is how can we avoid the traffic jam in the first place? Or why do we have so many meetings? What creates the demand for meetings in the first place? And I've advised many businesses, many companies in the past, and some of them told me about their experiments with they just decided to limit the amount of meetings. And you can probably imagine how that ended. It didn't end well. It's a bit like trying to stop people from going to the toilet, right? It's if there's a need, there's a way, and the necessity for coordinating your actions is still unchanged. You know, the need for coordinating your work with your peers across the different departments of a company is unchanged. So basically what companies do by just eliminating meetings or limiting the amount of maximum meetings is adding an extra layer of complexity by forcing employees to act under the radar, because again, the necessity for coordinating your work is still there. So maybe the correct question should be, what actually causes the necessity for meetings in the first place? Not how can we improve meetings, but what causes meetings in the first place? And here's one, not the, but one explanation. It's quite important to me that I highlight this. Like, I don't want you to get the impression that I'm saying this is the only source of meetings, but it's one dominant source for meetings. And it's a very strong one. And it goes like this. When businesses are born, everyone sits in the same boat, right? So you've got one goal, and that is to basically make sure that the business survives another day. And everyone knows that, and everyone knows everyone in the team. And if you can't solve a problem, you just ask your neighbor, and you get pretty much instant help. And there's no individual goals, there's no departmental parochialism, there's no bureaucracy. It's just like basically it's just a matter of getting the work done. But as businesses grow, as they get bigger, as they mature, they get to the point where people no longer fit around one table, where they no longer fit in one boat. So there's this inevitable need to somehow form groups, somehow find a structure that meets these growing demands of growth. And this is where very, very typically companies start organizing by function. And it's a super crucial point in a business's life cycle. And I've been at this point myself with my business, and I've seen many businesses meet this hurdle. And the thing is that tradition has it that we organize by function, because that's just the blueprint that pretty much every business out there follows. So we tend to organize by function. So you have sales, and you have development departments, and you have marketing, and you have IT and finance, etc. And as a consequence of that, you start thinking in those terms too. So you start thinking of salespeople and developers and marketing people and support staff and HR people and IT guys, etc. So what used to be talents who just fill this vacuum of required competencies becomes a group of employees with skill labels, basically. So they're just, you are an HR person, you are a sales guy. And at the beginning, that causes hardly any harm as a company grows. In fact, often it generates a certain degree of some form of relief, because you experience this pleasing clarity. So now we know how we're organized. Great, this helps. Now we've got some structure here. However, as your business grows, this can start causing harm. And this has to do with the very nature of value creation. So in the 1920s and the 30s and so on, this functional structure worked just fine because you could say you had distinct, you had conclusive points of handover, after which there was no further need to coordinate your work with the preceding function. So once the handover had taken place, there was no necessity to coordinate your work with the preceding function or the succeeding function. But now, with value creation being exposed to more case-by-case change, and due to more dynamic environments, that is more often the case, those single points of contact, those single points of distinct handovers get replaced by an almost constant need for kind of re-coordination. So with each feedback loop, you are dependent on someone else. And this someone else is no longer sat next to you, but they are a member of a different department. And as businesses grow, so do departments. And as departments grow, so does governance. So you find yourself in situations in which the colleague you need to talk to has different goals. And linked to those goals are performance reviews and bonuses, etc. And all the things popularized by the management approach that I try to not eradicate, but let's say tame in its negative effects, is kind of gradually unleashed. But it's disguised, because it's disguised by this omnipresent term, professionalization. That's what we call it, right? We professionalize the business. It's inevitable. We need to do this. That's the common narrative. And this is the situation that many employees find themselves in. So when they want to get stuff done, there's just one way to go about that. They need to coordinate their work. So you need to formally meet, and you need to navigate those formal meetings. You need to navigate that formal jungle that's been created. But because of the formal jungle that's been created, which doesn't meet the demands of the actual work, you simultaneously need to navigate the informal jungle and the informal meetings, because they are basically making up for the shortcomings of the formal structure and the formal meetings. So the root cause, you could say, for a growing number of meetings is the very functional division of labor into so-called professional organizational structures. And there is businesses that go about this growth in a very different way, or even return to what I call a functionally integrated organizational structure. And I know a decent amount of companies in Germany where my business operates that have decided to not to go by functions, but they've decided to identify value streams that typically would go across departmental structures and make these value streams the dominant criteria for forming teams and structuring the business. So when you arrive at a structure that is post-bureaucratic and post-functional, you will inevitably also have a lowering demand of formal meetings and formal structures. Does this kill all meetings? No, of course not. Is it easy? Definitely not. I've seen it succeed and I've seen it fail. And much more importantly, I've seen many very individual adaptations of this very general idea of integrating functions. But in many cases, it reduces this amount of meetings that is triggered by departmental structures. And it certainly reduces the amount of meetings because of the things that can be dealt with by just having a situation in which you're back to where you were as a startup. You can just ask your immediate peer because he's sat next to you, or these days you type a WhatsApp message because he's part of your organizational structure. And it also makes meetings a lot more effective because you reduce an enormous amount of political waste. So in conventional companies, in companies that are run in a very conventional manner and organized in a very conventional manner, Meetings are always burdened with all sorts of political interests and hidden agendas and internal competition and exchange of favors, and you know the drill, right? If you work in a structure like that, you probably know the drill. So to avoid this burden of ineffective meetings, very often it is worth looking beyond the meeting itself, and it's worth treating meetings as a symptom rather than a cause. So to sum this up, and I will make this the only story of this episode, as I made the last episode quite a bit longer, you can, of course, go with the article's advice. And as always, we will link to this article in the show notes. But it's certainly worth asking some bigger questions, especially if you've already watched like 100 YouTube videos on how to run effective meetings and you've read an equivalent amount of articles. Especially then, it's worth asking a bigger question, which is, where do these meetings come from and what can we do about it? Can we somehow identify the root cause of an increasing amount of need for coordination? And that normally comes along with a bad organizational structure, because there's always another way to think about these things. Right, that's it for today, guys. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you like it. It does give my team and myself that extra support to get this show off the ground. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Adios.